The need for constant stimulus produces an instability in our identity, proliferates all of these niche desires and identities, which then gets weaponized, gets given a political content. Modern technology, if unharnessed or insufficiently harnessed by an educational system that teaches discipline and by social and moral limits, is addictive because it presents us with a whole panoply of possibilities that we can easily get lost in. From Marshall McLuhan, quote, "TV fosters many preferences that are quite at variance with literate uniformity and repeatability, we could say, with the cultural canon and shared symbolic language of a given moment. It has sent Americans questing for every sort of oddment and quaintness in objects from out of their storied past. Many Americans will now spare no pains or expense to get a taste of some new wine or food. The uniform and repeatable now must yield to the uniquely askew, a fact that is increasingly the despair and confusion of our entire standardized economy." Oddment, the uniquely askew, the despair and confusion of our times. Some of this is good, but it can be taken too far, it can become addictive, and if all of that was true of TV when he was writing, it's all the more true of the internet. It also reminds us of something Soren Kierkegaard already described as the despair of possibility. Quote, "Now, if possibility outruns necessity, the self runs away from itself, so that it has no necessity whereto it is bound to return. Then, this is the despair of possibility. The self becomes an abstract possibility which tires itself out with floundering in the possible. More and more things become possible because nothing becomes actual. At last, it is as if everything were possible, but this is precisely when the abyss has swallowed up the self." End quote. Aimless doom scrolling, always looking for the next offering from cyberspace, the next AI prompt, this kind of thing. We end up not resting anywhere and being addicted to the constant novelty presented to us. We can think of this the same way as we do dynamics that erode social cohesion, only occurring inside the individual. So let's look at how, potentially, Kierkegaard's despair of possibility, as a consequence of certain uses of technology per McLuhan, can be used politically to break down cultures and control people, to make people weak, lacking in inner coherence, focused on very niche, specialized desires and identities. We can start from the end, from our tendency to adopt a false consciousness and identify with people, culture makers, the political class, that don't have our interests in mind, and see how that can be the result of this despair of possibility. "These eggs do not belong to different species. They were all laid by a single kind of bird, the cuckoo. It will place them in the nest of those whose shape they imitate, and destroy the true progeny. The unsuspecting mothers will then feed its offspring. This is the cuckoo bird's strategy. And in terms of memes rather than genes, of values, it describes much of the first world. Generational gaps, cultural alienation are all key. As a culture fails to reproduce itself, its children will imbibe the norms of others, namely of the predatory and the powerful. That which a community fails to do for itself will be done for it, to it. What we don't get from our family and neighbors, we get from somewhere else. There's a sense in which some of so-called progressive values, the sort that once represented a generational rift, have always belonged to the powerful. A rich man can afford the consequences of infidelity, family breakup, lacks morals and rising insecurity far better than a poor man. The latter is rendered vulnerable when he breaks from tradition, from community, more dependent on government programs and such. Getting people to identify with power, to take the side of policies that work to dispossess them, is a means of social control. We champion economic policies on the right or migration and social policies on the left that actually erode our communities and only benefit the political class, and we do so as a matter of cultural allegiance. We think we don't belong to the nest that hatched us. We think our interests are those of another bird. But it isn't just about identifying with power, it's about resenting the powerless. Because when the aspiring citizen of the world, the would-be member of the professional managerial class, about whom I've made a video before, realizes that he isn't really a cuckoo bird after all, that he doesn't really benefit from giving his loyalty to mainstream narratives and establishment policies, he may only grow to hate the kind of bird he is, to take a more vehement stance in favor of the breakdown of his own culture, nation, the institutions that structured the lives of his grandparents. If we think about the 21st century social engineer, his catalog of techniques, identifying with power and resentful alienation from institutions and social structures that might resist power would be their own chapters in his manual, his grimoire, or spell book for possessing people. Another image from nature is that of the Ophiocordyceps fungus with which this ant is infected. The fungus will make it scale the tallest plant stem it can find, clasp its jaw to a stable point, and prepare for a grotesque shoot to grow, to burst out of its head, releasing spores that will spread among new hosts below. The fact that it comes from its head is fitting, a metaphor for the mind virus, to use a term Elon Musk is fond of. I'm not a Musk fan, but I like that term. We could imagine what the ant feels, how it feels on its way up. Do the chemical secretions coursing through it cause a chain of purely unconscious impulses? Probably, but maybe its cognition is also being hijacked. Its ability to see vegetation, to identify the highest stem, to see where other potential hosts are gathered. These are all, after all, beyond the abilities of the fungus on its own. If the ant's mind, such as it is being taken over, maybe it does feel some type of way. We know variants that infect other insects cause hallucinations and erratic behavior. They excite the need for stimulus, impelling their host to more actively seek numerous mates so that the fungus can spread, for example. Maybe in those final moments, the ant thinks it is the fungus. Or maybe as it looks down at the other ants, at the thing it used to be, it feels a pang of resentment. It's resentment towards inherited identity that furthers people's dispossession. In this sense, the culture war isn't a distraction from degrading material conditions, downstream from economics, the way you sometimes hear it put. It's actually one of the means by which the middle and working classes are degraded. Culture isn't just an instrument of distraction, it's a means for dispossession. Ideas, memes, niche politically mobilized identities work like that fungus. They can make us feel alienated even as they seem to elevate us above others, and all along we're self-destructing. We serve them, not ourselves, not the people around us. Jordan Peterson, of whom I'm also not a fan, although he can be interesting, would call this ideological possession, which is a good term. Feeling alienated from, resentful of, rejected by our family, tradition, the past is a means for controlling us. But there's a third element here beyond identifying with power and resenting tradition. There's a push to sell people on the idea that they are anomalous. Educational institutions and media seem to like this tortured discourse of neurodiversity and fluidity and experimentation and the like. A lot of what we see in the so-called woke discourse, and I'm not ashamed of using that term, I know it's cliche, but it's descriptive, the niche identities on behalf of which we're told to question inherited frameworks like gender binaries, for example, proliferate in the context of constant internet-enabled stimulus to which people are subject today. And to the degree that we identify with these and become convinced that traditional morality, maybe our own families, our own ancestors, would despise us, we will tend to resent the past and give our allegiance instead to some radical alternative, to some project which pretends to embrace us, the power structure that benefits from the breakdown of older institutions, of the family, of any impediment to global markets or anything keeping society from being a mere aggregate of isolated individuals. They hijack the desire to be different, curiosity to seek out novelty, even strangeness, especially among the young. In contrast, difficult tasks, sustained focus, aesthetic absorption, reduce the speed and increase the intensity of mental and spiritual exertion, which is why there used to be such an emphasis on memorization and so on in traditional education. But desensitization, endorphin chasing, novelty/internet addiction tend towards denaturing us. Instead of enjoying a specific set of experiences, constantly refreshing that enjoyment and deepening those experiences, stabilizing a relationship to the existential possibilities proper to our personality, our vocation in life, sexual exclusivity in marriage, for example, the practice of a certain craft, the mastery of certain languages, we become accustomed to passing from one experience to another in rapid succession. This wreaks havoc on our ability to cultivate long-term relationships, for example. And it'll tend to make any stable structure replaceable. At the extreme, everything loses its ability to satisfy us, to provide an anchor. It's like how forms outside a car blur together when we speed by. Pornography is the ultimate example of this psychologically destructive addiction to novelty. So, jaded hyperstimulation, proliferation of niche tastes and identities, as a psychological dynamic has political salience. It's the sense that once someone has gone down a certain path, they will have no one except those who share in that path and the power structure that promotes it. You're supposed to feel divorced from older norms, so that you don't work within the frameworks that those norms built. Of course, that sense of irrevocable divorce isn't real, but to the degree that more traditionally minded folks fail to show compassion for especially younger people showing signs of being terminally online, they make it true. So, chase constant novelty to the point of unstable identity, resent inherited culture because you feel it rejects you on account of that identity, identify with power, with official discourse because it validates you. These are the three dark spells of the grimoire, the black book of the social engineer today. Okay, I've talked about some of these issues in videos before, but I wanted to formulate it in this way and emphasize the novelty addiction angle. As always, there's links in the description, ways to contribute to the channel, social media, etc. This channel isn't monetized at the moment, by the way. It used to be, but that got taken away and I tried to remonetize it, but that hasn't worked. So again, thank you very much for watching. Subscribe if you would like to, and until next time.